Hi, this is Dr. L, and I'm going to show you how to use Google Sheets as a spreadsheet to do some basic analysis of the data set generated in a recent laboratory where students looked to see if the level of India ink to which they were exposed affected the amount of phagocytosis that happened, as observed by counting ink-filled vacuoles inside each tetrahymena organism. We use Tetrahymena piriformis for this. This is actual data from the experiment from 5 student researchers who got full data sets, and so we're using their data to illustrate how to analyze this kind of information. So the first thing that you do when you're doing this kind of analysis is organize the information into a spreadsheet. And so you're going to do some transposing of handwritten data typically into the spreadsheet, and you're going to organize it. So here we have student researcher in this column over in A. We have the experimental tubes or conditions, and we did 2 different times, time 0 and time 10 minutes. And we did 2 different ink concentrations, 1% India ink and 10% India ink. The students counted a number of different organisms. They did a lot of replicates, and what this data is just the pooled total count of vacuoles for all the organisms analyzed. So it's really very raw data, and I think to compare these things that it is fine to leave it just in its raw data form. So the first thing I'm going to show you is how to use Google Sheets to get the average or mean of the data. So I want to take the average of this, and the average of this, the average of this, and the average of this. So 4 different averages. So I've typed in average and standard deviation down here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this cell. I'm going to use the equal sign because that's what tells the spreadsheet that I want to do a calculation. And I'm going to type in average or AV, and I'm going to pick just average. Okay, and then I'm going to tell it what data I want to take the average of by selecting all of it with my mouse, closing bracket, and then enter sign. Okay, and then the nice thing about spreadsheets instead of using calculators is that you only have to do that kind of thing once. So if I select the cell again and I position my mouse where that little square is in the bottom and I drag it over, it will autofill for this data set, and this data set without me having to retype it. And I can double check that it's doing that by selecting that particular cell and then looking up here in the formula, f at x's formula window, and it's saying it's taking the average of the array from C3 to C7. And C3 is here, and C7 is here. So it's taking this data set and it's determining the average. So that's good. That's one descriptive statistic to represent or describe this data. Now I want to know what the standard deviation is within this data set. So again, I just put my cell there, I type equals, and then I type ST, and then I'm going to pick the simplest standard deviation. And I'm going to say I want the standard deviation of this information. I select that array, and then I close the bracket and hit enter, and there's my standard deviation. So the average of this data set, which represents the total numbers of vacuoles counted in the experiment under 1% India ink at our baseline or 0 time, the average was 31.4 vacuoles, and the standard deviation there was 7.2. Again, I don't like retyping things if I don't have to, so I'm just going to select the bottom right of that cell, and I'm going to pull this over, and it will auto-populate. And I always double check that things went well, so I'll click in this time, this cell, and it should tell me that it's taking the standard deviation of this array, column E, and here we see E3 to E7, and StDev is the standard deviation. So now I have some nice basic statistics. And the next thing I'm going to do is to make a bar or column graph of the mean of each of the experimental types. It'll be 4 columns, and I'm going to plot the standard deviations on that, and I'll show you that in a moment.